Hello and welcome to the last in the series of Peacasts on the topic of lyricism. With me, Patricia. And of course the input of many haiku friends. Judging by the amount of feedback I've had from you, it's a topic that you're finding interesting. In the main, you seem to be of the mindset that lyricism is missing from haiku and senryu these days. And more than one of you raised the subject of the editor's role in the type of poetry we are writing and seeing in magazines. It got me thinking. I don't submit half as much as I used to. In many ways it's because I just don't have the time, and I'm, if I'm honest, often too late to submit. But I've also pared down the journals that I submit to because I just don't write the poetry that they published. And nor do I want to, if I'm brutally honest. How about you? Anyway, amongst my virtual chats with other poets, Janice Doppler wrote this to me. Lyrical, she says, suggests soaring, beautiful poetry. I totally agree, Janice. Although there might be at least one poem today that you and I might disagree on. Janice also brought my attention to the idea that some people might use the term normative to describe the haiku and senryu I've been focusing on over the last few weeks. She said the term has negative connotations. That is, that the type of poetry I've been talking about is old-fashioned and mired in restrictive norms. And she's probably right, isn't she? Normative. Ugh. People who refer to poetry as normative are barbarians, I replied. And as she later pointed out, I was channeling my inner Basho. Do you remember this quote she gave us from Basho in her first presentation to us on Zoka? Depart from the barbarian, break away from the beast, follow the creative, return to the creative. That was a translation by David Landis Barnhill in his book Basho's Journey, The Literary Prose of Matsuo Basho. And if you'd like to know more about the creative, about Zoka, and missed Janice's presentations and the essays, I'll put a link in the show notes. So it's time to go on to the creative, to break away from the beast, and here's some haiku and senryu that I think meets the criteria I set out in the previous Peacasts. That is, something I can connect to emotionally, and which is often enhanced by a poem's musicality, its rhythm. But remember, no manipulative pulling on my heartstrings. That won't do at all. So, do you recall we heard some poetry from Peggy Willis-Lyles last time in the pre-2000 poems? Well, I have another one for you, recommended to us by Tony Williams, and written after the year 2000. Mother's scarf slides from my shoulder, wild violets. As I said, Peggy Willis-Lyles, from her book To Hear the Rain, which was published in 2002. The imagery is beautiful in this poem, and the sound as well. Let's hear it again and listen to how those S sounds enhance the poem. Mother's scarf slides from my shoulder, wild violets. Where does this little beauty take you? For me, it could be purely a picture from her life. Her mother's scarf sliding from her shoulders, and it has a print of wild violets on it. I'm slightly obsessed with scarves recently, but I think it's deeper than that. I can't help but feel, as my mother would have said, a little divilment in this poem. Perhaps she acquired her mother's scarf without her mother's knowledge, and is up to a little bit of no good. I sort of hope so. Righty-ho, I have some more recommendations from other folks in our community, and this is a good time to thank Tony Williams, Janice Doppler, Keith Everts, Sebastian Ravon, Richard Tice and Katie Montagna for all their help with this and the other podcasts in the series on lyrical haiku and senryu. You are stellar. Thank you so much. Morning Run. The sycamore seeds, a shade lighter. Morning Run. The sycamore seeds, a shade lighter. C.X. Turner. From the Poetry Pea anthology Little Marvels in 2024. Amongst meadow sweet, lilting sparrow song. Amongst meadow sweet, lilting sparrow song. C.X. Turner. From the Poetry Pea Journal 1/23. I'm going to look briefly at the calls and songs of birds in a little while. But why is it, do you think, that birds play such a role in the emotional roller coaster of our lives? Foggy street, the fragrance of roses from a laundry door. Foggy street, the fragrance of roses from a laundry door. Laurie Kiefer, Poetry Pea Journal 1/23. At the window, the blue moon and I, still standing alone. At the window, the blue moon and I, still standing alone. Laurie Kiefer, Poetry Pea Journal 3/22. Dusk. The blackbird's song drifts into moonlight. Dusk. The blackbird's song drifts into moonlight. Annie Wilson, from Leaf, Issue 6, 2025. Rowing on the lake, aroused by the rhythm of the rollocks. Rowing on the lake, aroused by the rhythm of the rollocks. Annie Wilson, Poetry Pea Journal 2/22. And now I've got a poet who you've heard reading her work on Poetry Pea, Kristin Lindquist. If you haven't heard it or you want to revisit it, there will be some links on the show notes. She previously read to us from her books It Always Comes Back and Island. Map lichen. The time it takes a river to carve a valley. Map lichen. The time it takes a river to carve a valley. Kristin Lindquist, Poetry Pea Journal 2021. Stream crossing. Maple flowers spangle the stepping stones. Stream crossing. The maple flowers spangle the stepping stones. And that was from Kristin's blog, Book of Days, for the 1st of May 2026. And if you don't know that blog, I'll put that in the show notes. So far, we've heard from the ladies. But you know, there are chaps writing lyrical poetry. Let's hear from one of our regulars, John Hawkhead. Shades of summer, a bumblebee wends its way through my dream flowers. Shades of summer, A bumblebee wends its way through my dream flowers. John Hawkhead, Poetry Pea Journal, 2021. Snowflakes falling on the child's upturned face. The stillness of stars. Snowflakes falling on the child's upturned face. The stillness of stars. John Hawkhead, the winner of Haiku Now contest, 2013. Lifting from the lake, a great crested grebe becomes one again. Lifting from the lake, a great crested grebe becomes one again. John Hawkhead, from Lothlorien magazine in September 2024. Now we know Janis Doppler loves a soaring, beautiful poem. Shall we hear some of hers? Summer sky, rippling the silence, a water snake. Summer sky, rippling the silence, a water snake. Janis Doppler, Heron's Nest, September 2023. Scent of rain, the pitch change of rolling thunder. Scent of rain, the pitch change of rolling thunder. Janis Doppler, Shadow Pond Journal, Issue 2, November 2024. River overlook. Late winter sun warms the eagle's back. River overlook. Late winter sun warms the eagle's back. Janis Doppler, from Poetry Pea's Little Marvels in 2025. Now, before we return to flowers, birds and seasonal references, a tiny pause for something rather less lyrical, though no less heartfelt. If you're enjoying these peacasts, whether you're listening whilst folding the laundry, who doesn't, wandering through the woodland, or avoiding writing your own haiku by listening to other people's, okay, I'm busted. Perhaps you'll consider helping to keep Poetry Pea flourishing. There are all sorts of ways to support us, and none of them involve selling your firstborn or writing perfect seasonal haiku, although you do know I love to read those. You could become a Poetry Pea member, which is rather like joining the village fete committee, only with fewer folding chairs and considerably more poetry. You know, membership helps keep the podcast, the journal, the workshops and all the lovely pea things growing. Or, if membership feels a bit too much like commitment, you could simply buy me a coffee, a small but mighty gesture which helps fuel the editing, the recording, the website wrangling, and occasionally me. In fact, I'm going to have a sip in a minute because, as you can hear, my voice is going. If you prefer, there's also PayPal for donations, should you feel moved to toss a few coins into the poetry hat. Every contribution, however modest, genuinely helps. And of course, you can buy the Poetry Pea Journal. 126 is out at the moment and available at Buy Me a Coffee. If you're quick, you can get it at the early bird discount. But at some point today, the price increases. If, on the other hand, your pockets are feeling a little bit threadbare, believe me, I totally get it. There are other wonderful ways to support us. You could volunteer some time or skills. Perhaps you're handy with social media, or organising things, techie things, or simply just have enthusiasm in abundance. I'm always delighted to hear from people who'd like to lend a hand. And finally, and this one costs absolutely nothing, you could give us a shout out, tell your poetry friends, mention us in your writing group, share an episode, whisper Poetry Pea dramatically to strangers in bookshops. Word of mouth is still one of the very best ways to help this little poetry community thrive. However you choose to support us, through membership, coffee, donations, volunteering, submitting, or simply listening, thank you. Truly. Poetry Pea exists because of this wonderfully generous community, and I'm very glad you're part of it. Now, a little sip of coffee, and back to the poems. Just when I thought the day was grey, a blue jay swoops over the lilac. Just when I thought the day was grey, a blue jay swoops over the lilac. Doris Lynch, from the Poetry Pea Journal 2021. Harvest moon, a beggar and the hope in his dog's eyes. Harvest moon, a beggar and the hope in his dog's eyes. M. Shane Pruitt, from the days when we didn't have a journal and I read poetry just on the podcast, and that was from Series 3, Episode 22. An air of autumn on the last day of summer, green acorns in the rain. An air of autumn on the last day of summer, green acorns in the rain. Craig Kittner, Poetry Pea Journal 2023. And now this one, I make no bones about it, was one of my favourite haiku written for Poetry Pea in 2022. Snow on reeds, the hush of a barn owl across the fen. Snow on reeds, the hush of a barn owl across the fen. Christopher Jupp, Poetry Pea Journal 2022. I nominated this poem for analysis on the Haiku Foundation's Revirals, number 386, if you want to go and have a look. And I believe it was Keith Evetts who made the opening comment on it when he said, "A haiku well-rooted in tradition. 4 visual elements, snow, reeds, owl and fen, carefully arranged in subtle juxtaposition. Each is relatable to the others. There's no disruption. The whole arrangement of distinct elements combines in harmony. Toria vase. There is the silence of the snow, the owl's flight, and the still waters of the marshy fen. The whiteness of snow and owl, these bind the elements together. There is chiaroscuro, I assume it is night, from the owl, and we have the dark waters. There is action, a hint of mystery, a touch of awe, a fragment of a story about to begin in plain words, without verb or adjective. No direct presence of the poet, no sentimental nor sentitious thought, no indeterminate pronoun." And if you want to read more, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can read all the comments. It was quite interesting, and there's even a little bit from Christopher himself. Snow on reeds, the hush of a barn owl across the fen. Dawn stillness, a warbler's song tips the tallest reed. Dawn stillness, a warbler's song tips the tallest reed. Christopher Jupp, from Gitanjali and Beyond in 2017. And like I said at the beginning, I had some help from some of you to put this podcast together, and many of the poets who follow were suggested by Katie Montagna. Not all of them, but quite a few, and not all the poems, because I went looking for a few that I had really enjoyed too. Thanks, Katie. The pale green on the tips of a willow, flowing river. The pale green on the tips of a willow, flowing river. Daniela Miso, from Chrysanthemum, issue 34. And this one was the judge's choice in Poetry Pea Journal 223, chosen by Matt Defibauer. I'll read it to you and give you some snippets of his commentary. Clouds. The intermittent flow of an ancient fountain. Daniela Miso, Poetry Pea Journal 223. And Matt said of this poem that its imagery and juxtaposition are what makes it stand out. We can easily picture the scene, the softness of cloud-filtered light illuminating an antique fountain. The ellipsis at the end of the opening line encourages us to pause in appreciation and contemplation of the image, and could indicate the nature of how the clouds dot the sky. No water is mentioned, but it's implied, primarily through the use of the word intermittent, whose hard T sounds can be compared to the sound of water trickling nearby. He says it's a relatively heavy word for haiku, but adds some necessary sound. Clouds. The intermittent flow of an ancient fountain. Dawn breaking, an eggshell the shade of sunrise. Dawn breaking an eggshell the shade of sunrise. Laurie Greer, from Kingfisher 10. And Katie Montagna says of this poem that it uses diction, interestingly, with its shade, and then wordplay too, with its repetition of sound and with its awareness of double meanings. Dawn, breaking an eggshell the shade of sunrise. And the next one is also by Laurie Greer, but from the Wales Haiku Journal in winter 2021. Penumbral eclipse, the shades of light on a moth's wing. Penumbral eclipse, the shades of light on a moth's wing. Laurie Greer. I want to look again at this poem, as Keith did at Christopher's, and look at the use of verbs, adjectives and nouns. Only one adjective, penumbral, and no verbs, but a number of nouns. Haiku are often said to be the poetry of nouns. Anyway, my point is, one adjective, no verbs, plenty of nouns, has resulted in a majestic, lyrical poem. Now, I said earlier that I'd go back to the sound of birds. And I've got a few poems that illustrate how poets have used birdsong, bird calls to enhance the lyricism of a poem. Low tide mist, a curlew's call ripples the air. Low tide mist, a curlew's call ripples the air. And that's Thomas Powell from Blithe Spirit 35, issue 1. Breaking dawn, a rose opens to a robin's song. breaking dawn, a rose opens to a robin's song. And that's by one of our editing team, Vandana Parashar, from Daily Haiku, June 16th, 2016. Morning paddle, a red-winged blackbird cuts the silence. Morning paddle, a red-winged blackbird cuts the silence. Reed Hepworth, Poetry Pea Journal 2023. The skylark's vertical contrail of song. The skylark's vertical contrail of song. Anton Floyd from Seashores, issue 14. I have a few more which are bird-related, but without their songs. But I still think they're lyrical poems. If you disagree, you know where I am. Country Lane, the fresh eggs box buried in free-range nettles. Country Lane, the fresh eggs box buried in free-range nettles. Ben Oliver from Presence, issue 79. Pink mallow and a circling red kite stuck in this traffic. Pink mallow and a circling red kite stuck in this traffic. Ben Oliver from the Poetry Pea Journal 223. Early frost. A goose feather clings to the marsh reed. Early frost. A goose feather clings to the marsh reed. Paula Sears, Modern Haiku 56-2. Sea lavender. A spider weaving the marshlight. Sea lavender, a spider weaving the marshlight. Paula Sears, from Blithe Spirit, 35-1. Endless sky, the sun, moon and stars in a dandelion. Endless sky, the sun, moon and stars in a dandelion. Paula Sears, from the Man Library Poem of the Day. Remember back at the beginning when I said Janice and I were discussing lyricism in poetry, and I said we might disagree on one of the poems? Well, this is the one, and I think it's perhaps the antithesis of Soaring Beauty, but I feel it still works as an example of the lyrical poem. I think it's the rhythm and the images which does it for me. Park bench. The homeless man scrubs bird shit from a once familiar name. Park bench. The homeless man scrubs bird shit from a once familiar name. Tracy Davidson, Poetry Pea Journal 2023. I want to end this podcast with a poem that I just loved from the latest journal. Don't forget, you can purchase it following the link in the show notes or on the website. The poem looks beautiful on the page, and it has a visual impact, I think. But I'm all about reading it aloud, and oh my, I really feel the melody. And consider as I read it what the poem does to you emotionally. To me, it's melancholy. There's an ache in my heart when I read it. Dry wind. The grass bending to the north. Dry wind. The grass bending to the north. Clive Grucock, from the Poetry Pea Journal, 1/26. So you can see what we can do with just a few words. And as I come to the end of this little series on lyricism in haiku and senryu, I hope it's given you something to ponder. Whether that's the role of sound in a poem, the power of the image and the rhythm, the grammatical content. Do we need adjectives and verbs aplenty? No, not really. Concentrate maybe on the nouns. And I hope, if you're not a writer of lyrical haiku and senryu, you might just have a go. It's been a pleasure to explore this with you, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful to everyone who wrote in, shared poems, offered recommendations, and helped me think more carefully about what makes a poem soar. And thank you to all of you listening, whether you're quietly nodding along or muttering objections into your tea. Next time, don't just nod or mutter. Get those fingers working on your keyboard. I'd really like some help with this topic. For example, do modern journals take a sufficient number of lyrical haiku and senryu? Should I start a campaign to appreciate soaringly beautiful poems? I'm definitely going to campaign for poems that have rhythm, balance, and which sound so precious as you ponder them. And many of you have pointed out that if we're talking lyricism, then we really can't ignore tanka, a form which has an even greater propensity for musicality, emotional resonance, and that delicate ache that poetry can sometimes leave behind. And I will look at them this year, but a wee bit later. So if anyone has thoughts or favourite lyric tanka, you know where to send them. Next week I'm back to bring you some original haiku from the video prompt, which last time was created by the truly fabulous Lakshmi Iyer. So until then, keep writing. And remember, there will be links in the show notes, so don't forget to check them out. And if you've changed your style already and tried out some lyrical poems on other editors, let me know of your success or failure. Ciao!